Zulfi Bhutto of Pakistan, His Life and Times by Stanley Wolpert. Chapter 9. President Bhutto picks up the pieces. December 1971 to July 1972. He talked for more than an hour, insisting that he was prepared to work for a modus vivendi in the East. He was also ready to give the country the rule of law, but not quite yet. Soon, very soon, he promised. But please give me time. The lack of accountability has left us in a very bad plight. We have not lost a war. We have not failed. Our soldiers fought valiantly. We are the victims of our system. The Western press has been against us, not the United States this time, not the Soviet Union, not even India, but the Western press. It was a new level of creativity. Shortly after, I am afraid the nation has been fed on lies. Deception has been the order of the day. For economic and social justice, I will move as fast as is necessary to see the burden of the common man lifted. I am a man who works 24 hours a day. I expect the bureaucracy to do the same. Zulfi also vowed to finish corruption and misadministration. There would be no vindictiveness towards any bureaucrat who has misbehaved with me in the past. Yet, before firing Rudad Khan, he had ordered the arrest and incarceration of Altaf Gohar. The police were ordered to put an end to the bureaucracy's tyranny, its zulm. He would indulge in no nepotism, show no favoritism to friends or relatives, no sifarish. I am not going to permit my relations to say that we are related to Bhutto. I have no relations. I have no family. My family is the people of Pakistan. My children are the people of Pakistan. To help him rebuild democracy, Zulfi appointed Mumtaz Ali Bhutto as governor of Sindh and his old Vadero friend and People's Party patron Mir Rasul Bakhsh Khan Talpur, descendant of the pre-British ruling Talpur Mirs of Sindh, Mumtaz's senior advisor, the martial law equivalent of chief minister. Mumtaz's appointment made Jatoi hysterical, Zulfi recalled. He had promised Sindh's chief ministership to Jatoi, yet now resolved instead to keep him with me in the federal government holding a very important portfolio, and later he could go to Sindh. As Chief Martial Law Administrator, President Bhutto could appoint anyone he wished to govern any province or manage any ministry. He made Jatoi Minister for the Political Affairs, Communications and Natural Resources. Not only Jatoi, of course, but his playful wife, Maria, thus remained at Zulfi's side, always within reach. Zulfi brought J. A. Rahim into his cabinet as Minister for Presidential Affairs, Culture, Town Planning and Agrovilles, and made Dr. Mubashir Minister for Finance, Economic Affairs and Development. He kept the Foreign Affairs, Defense, Interior, and Provincial Coordination ministries in his own busy hands, bringing his former Foreign Secretary Aziz Ahmad back into service from retirement. He also used the considerable experience of the Oxford trained Rafi Raza to advise him on primarily military matters. 1 week after Zulfi took charge in Pindi, he had himself driven after sundown to a well guarded army bungalow near the military airport. Mujib had been flown there the day before by helicopter from his prison cell, where he had seen no newspaper, heard no radio since his arrest in Dhaka in late March. When they brought me here, I was thinking that another disaster was coming, the tall, haggard prisoner said, faintly smiling at the sight of his old friend, though as yet uncertain while all the armed guards were in that room as well. Then Zulfi told him of the transfer of power in Pindi. I am happy, Mujib responded. Believe me, I am happy. Tell me what is the condition of Bengal. I am very perturbed. Bhutto explained that India's army was occupying Dhaka, had moved in with Soviet guns and trucks under the cover of Soviet warships and planes. That means they have killed us, Mujib cried. Bhutto, they have killed us. You'd better get me on to Dhaka. You have to promise one thing to me that I will be having your help. If the Indians put me in jail, you will have to fight for me. We will fight together, Mujib, Zulfi promised. No, no, Mujib replied, knowing full well with whom he was dealing, and knowing, of course, that every word he said was being taped in this well wired sitting room. I have to settle matters there. The occupation army is there. That I am sure. Awami League cannot move them, that I am sure. The world will understand. I want your help. Believe me, I never wanted the Indians. You don't believe me. I believe you, Bhutto said. Otherwise, do you think that I would have immediately taken this action? The first thing I did was to order your release from there and coming here. Well, you have taken the charge. I am happy, Mujib repeated, though he did not sound happy, nor did he feel happy. His furtive eyes darted around that strange, safe house room. He wondered if he would ever be permitted to see his beloved Dhaka again, or his family and friends. You have done away with the military. Now it is a secondary matter, Zulfi replied evasively. Military will not come back again. I just want to see the unity of my country on whatever terms you want. He still dreamed of undoing the past, using this prisoner, his prisoner now, even as retired Yahya was, to replay history's tape, to put Humpty Dumpty Pakistan back together again. Why not? Was he now not both the president and chief martial law administrator of Pakistan? And wasn't this poor Bengali fool his mouse to play with, to tease and tickle as he liked? I just want to see the unity of my country, he said, not ours, for he still disturbed Mujib almost as much as Mujib mistrusted him. No, no terms, Mujib told him, fearing the worst as he looked into those bloodshot eyes. Tell me what is the position of my country. Mujib Bhai, if there is any possibility that we can live together. I will hold a public meeting in Dhaka, Mujib said. I will meet my people, discuss with them, and inform you. That is my promise. I will speak drop by drop. They will believe me. Inshallah, we'll do something. I have not to say about this outright. You understand my position. He was terrified at the thought of his Awami League comrades learning that he was actually negotiating here with President Bhutto. Yet, if he did not speak softly to this man who held the keys to his life, what would become of him? How could he survive? When would he be sent home? Zulfi played with his Bengali prisoner for another 11 days, leaving Mujib to simmer and sweat, to tremble and wonder what on earth would happen to him and what had befallen his once golden Bengal. Till 7th January 1972. Zulfi left him there alone, returning that night after his birthday celebrations in Larkana were over. He was more anxious now to woo Mujib, to bring him and all his Bengali millions back under his protective west wing. What a coup that would be! What Ayub and Yahya had lost, he, Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, would recapture. Qaide Awam Shaheed, Survivor Bhutto. On the 27th, you said that we can have 2 or 3 things together. Zulfi reminded Mujib as soon as they were alone again. Defense, foreign affairs, and currency. Before that, you have to allow me to go, Mujib replied nervously. But I don't mind confederation, however loose it is, Zulfi insisted, pressing him for some minimal commitment. No, no, I have already told you that we can wait. Some sort of arrangements we can make. I told you it will be a confederation. This is absolutely between you and me. I know that you have not told anybody. No, why should I tell? Muttered Bhutto. I'll keep it absolutely confidential. You leave it to me, Mujib insisted. Absolutely. Leave it to me. Trust me. I trust you, Zulfi told him. They trusted each other. I will tell these things to the millions of people of Bangladesh when I first go there. That Yahya, before handing over the charge to Mr. Bhutto, wanted first to kill me. I will demand from there Yahya's hanging. You understand? Trial. Trial, I say. First, give trial to this man, then I'll talk to you. You understand? I have to take in confidence my people. The wounds are serious. Who do you think was the bigger villain, Yahya or Pirzada? Bhutto asked him. Both. I know, Zulfi agreed. Content, it almost seemed to sit all night and chatting. They were all three his prisoners now. He alone had emerged from the last mad year of blood and terror, not only free but on top, comfortably secure at Pakistan's pinnacle of power. Yet he was so eager to win back Bangladesh that he told Mujib, Listen, presidentship, prime ministership, whatever you take, I am prepared to retire to the country. I swear by Holy Quran that I am prepared to retire. I told you there is no objection, Mujib replied. My idea was that we will live together and we will rule this country. This Haram Zada Yahya started the fuss telling me this was what you had said and communicating to you. Then the disaster started in Bengal. But now we have to put the things right, Zulfi reminded him. We have to try, Mujib conceded. But you know the route. I have to go. I have to cope. You know the occupation army is there. Our army massacred, as in Indonesia. Another point is there. I tell you frankly, the West Bengalis, I have to take them out from Bengal and crush. My difficulties, you understand. Yes, it is very difficult, Zulfi agreed. He was faced now with similar, outspoken opposition and it would keep growing, especially those who blamed him for losing most of Pakistan. I am prepared to fly to Dhaka. No, no, Mujib insisted, holding his head painfully. I'll meet with my people. I want time. I'll tell you from there. You have become a hero. You will continue for your whole life. Nay, I don't want, Zulfi told him. You should be our president. Zulfi also offered him $50,000, but Mujib was too nervous to take any money from him, suggesting instead that he contribute it to my chartered plane. Shortly after midnight on 8th January 1972, Mujib flew to London. There were no direct flights from Pakistan to Bangladesh, and Mujib preferred London to Tehran or Ankara, the other options Bhutto had suggested. The PIA jet landed at Heathrow in grey fog at 6:30 that morning, and a much relieved, bedraggled Mujibur Rahman, the nation savior hero of Bangladesh, was whisked off in a Rolls limousine to the elegant Claridge's Hotel in the heart of Mayfair. Before noon on that first day of his freedom, Mujib had spoken from his suite with Indira Gandhi in Delhi and Prime Minister Edward Heath in Downing Street. Heath authorized release of an RAF plane to fly his fellow Commonwealth Prime Minister home the next day. Mujib stopped first in Delhi, where he received a hero's welcome from Indira and her entire cabinet. In Dhaka, an adoring ocean of Bengali faces awaited him, looking up to Bangabandhu, nation unifier, Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, for answers to all the tragic needs of his young nation, born after so much trauma, left in such desperate poverty. The difficulties confronting him were far greater than Mujib had imagined. President Bhutto's own problems proliferated as well, though he pretended to be on top of everything, jauntily telling an American journalist from the Baltimore Sun, if you Americans think that Franklin Roosevelt had an amazing first 100 days, watch us. The reporter was impressed, informing his readers of how hard Pakistan's new president worked, sleeping only 3 or 4 hours each night. He had to travel so much, of course, dividing his nights between Pindi and Karachi when he was not in Larkana or Lahore. With the new year, Zulfi announced his immediate nationalization of 10 categories of major industries, including iron and steel, basic metals, heavy engineering, heavy electrical, motor vehicles, tractors, basic chemicals, petrochemicals, cement, and public facilities. Capital equipment worth an estimated rupees 1 billion was brought under state control, and the new board of industrial management chaired by Dr. Mubashir Hassan was appointed by Bhutto to supervise some 30 major industries. A debilitating flight of capital began soon after this martial law socialist policy was initiated and would continue throughout the period of Zulfi's People's Party government as well. The sudden and unexpected nationalization, of course, plummeted Pakistan's international credit rating in London as well as in New York and Washington. Zulfi turned more and more for financial support to North African friends, especially to Muammar Gaddafi of Libya, to his good hunting friend, the Sheikh of Abu Dhabi, and to Communist China. We must dedicate our energies to ensure maximum production and highest quality, Zulfi told the nation in announcing the nationalization move. The workers will now have a real stake in the success of these undertakings. There is no substitute for hard work. There is now a people's government, and the peoples are ultimately masters. On the next day, Zulfi addressed a public meeting in Karachi, speaking in Sindhi. You must never forget that I am one of you, one from amongst you. When I was summoned from New York, the country was very close to civil war. I was needed by my countrymen and was wanted in my homeland. But I did not know that things were so bad, because as truth was never told to you, and as you were fed on nothing but lies, I was being supplied with incorrect news. Yahya had asked us to accept power. He said to me that I must accept the government which belonged to the people. I told him that the ship of the nation is afire. I and my party had declared in April and appealed in the name of God that power should be transferred immediately to the people. To that, Yahya Khan and his colleagues replied that whoever talked of the transfer of power was a traitor. Now it is for you, the people of Karachi, to give your verdict as to who proved a traitor. Were they the traitors or were we the traitors? What did these people do? They had beaten the workers, they lashed the peasants, they ruined the country so much that we have now reached our present tragic plight. Now it was Yahya's turn to be Zulfi's target, as Ayub previously had been. Zulfi told his people that Yahya was only intending to lead the politicians to their doom, that he was a liar, a drunkard, and a fraud who conspired against the people. As proof positive of Yahya's treachery, Zulfi noted that during the recent elections, my opponent in Larkana, Kohro, was promised support and was given money. Over my dead body I will transfer power to Bhutto, Yahya said. Listen, my comrades, listen carefully. People had become restive, and many were angry, weary, fed up, though underfed, heart-sore and depressed. Prices kept rising and everything was scarce: food, shelter, clothing, all the things Bhutto's party had promised them. You cannot have all the reforms in one day, he cried out. Even the most sacred reforms took 23 years, and they were brought by our holy prophet. I am not even worth the dust of his feet. On the one hand, you are asking for democracy, and on the other hand, you want reforms. Confusion is being created in the minds of the people. No compensation has been given, they complain. This is sheer high handedness, they say. Now, on the one hand, people are saying that it is hardly anything which I have done and that it is not enough. Yes, agricultural reforms are on their way. They are accusing me of being a landlord, a feudal lord. Lands are of no consequence to me. As for the educational reforms, this is only the first phase of our reforms. Every day they are taunting me about my manifesto. But who can digest in one day all that the manifesto contains? Who is going to be benefited by the industrial units which we have taken over? These are your factories, your industries. No government of this kind has ever come to power. Very soon, I would bring labor reforms. Give me some time. The promise of democracy is a true promise, a genuine promise. But those who are shouting every day for democracy to be ushered immediately are in reality the henchmen of the capitalists. Beware of them. Workers who were not paid went on strike. Students left their classes and joined in protest rallies, demanding more reforms and cheaper food and rent. Nothing had as yet changed for the better, only for the worse. It seemed because the economic picture was so bleak. For most of the 1960s, Pakistan's economy had been relatively robust, especially in the West Wing. But now all the indicators were moving down. Some kept falling for the next half decade till Zulfi Bhutto was toppled from his seat at the top. Zulfi tried intimidation. If you don't work, I will have to bring another government, perhaps the same type of people who used to rule over you. He tried remonstrance. Are you such ignorant children who cannot understand that in 2 days or even 10 days we cannot do everything? Don't you know that your country is a backward country? Don't you know that in one day I cannot nationalize everything? He cast himself as victim. Why are you doing all this to me? He pleaded. I appeal to you, my dear workers, to stop for God's sake this labor unrest and all such things. Start working. Get down to your jobs. I swear by God and His Prophet that we will be on your side. Then, but don't press us. We also have our breaking point. Undeniably, the problems facing Pakistan were monumental. They would have challenged the most experienced, level headed administrator or the capacity of any team of experts in many fields. But Zulfi Bhutto really had no solid grounding in administration, and few capable men he trusted to assist or guide him. He tried to run Pakistan as he had run his estates in Larkana, or the way he managed his personal affairs, like the feudal lord he still was, with alternate threats and promises, with carrots and sticks, with bribes and hunting rifles, curses and tears, and solemn oaths to God. And part of him meant each contradictory move, each conflicting word or phrase, for he was many Bhuttos, all wrestling inside him. His greatest weakness as president and later as prime minister may have been his inability to attract to his service men of greater integrity or probity. Perhaps no leader ever feels quite comfortable or safe with assistants superior to himself. Yet, some middling minds have the talent and capacity to recruit high level ability, even genius. Zulfi was always suspicious of everyone around him. He usually feared some conspiracy or other and was himself so astute at realpolitik that he suspected his closest colleagues and allies of plotting against him. He scolded his closest associates a great deal. Perhaps he thought that just pointing out their weaknesses would suffice to make them discard abhorrent habits of a lifetime. He also seems to have hoped that by working inordinately long hours, he, Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, would set so high a standard for others that intense dedication would, in itself, solve Pakistan's most intractable problems. He counseled his governors and ministers to keep uppermost in mind that they must remain in touch with the people, with their sentiments and aspirations. This can best be achieved by traveling among the people as much as possible. Officers must work and not be distracted. Pomp, show, and ceremony do not represent respect. Respect must be earned by hard, honest work. This standard of service I am not only setting down for you, but fully intend to maintain myself as an example. Zulfi promised to convene provincial assemblies on 23rd March 1972, a promise he had made 2 months earlier. Pakistan has been made weak because the people have been denied their rights. The wishes of the people can be properly manifested only through institutions. It was his best advisers who had convinced him of that truism of all good government. He asserted now his realization that governors cannot single handedly run the entire political machinery of the provinces. Though his first two appointees in Sindh and Punjab, Mumtaz Bhutto and Mustafa Khar, came as close to trying to do so as Zulfi himself did at the center. It is being asked why I continue to act under the cover of martial law. Zulfi noted, first arguing in response. I have a mandate from the people, a mandate without parallel in our history. Then adding contrarily, the title of the chief martial law administrator I have inherited is not our only inheritance. Will the new self professed mentors of democracy who readily call for immediate lifting of the martial law show us how simultaneously to lift the masses from their morass of miseries and injustice? The power of martial law have been used for the sole purpose of bringing basic reforms. Once this first phase of reforms is over, the ground would be laid for full flowering of democracy. On the eve of flying off on a support seeking tour of the Arab countries, Bhutto invited leaders of Karachi's business and industrial community to meet with him at the airport's VIP lounge. I am not your enemy, he told them. In the previous regimes, industrialization went on without any rational framework, without any social context, any egalitarian context. We have to go in accordance with the requirements of the modern times. As you sow, so shall you reap, and as we sow, so shall we reap. You say respectable people have been thrown into jail. You call yourselves respectable. I call myself respectable. But what does the common man call us? He calls us parasites and bloodsuckers. Zulfi withdrew Pakistan from Britain's Commonwealth of Nations and US dominated SEATO. Then he flew to China in early February, where he drank many toasts to the health of the chairman Mao Zedong and Chow and Lee, to the further development of friendship and cooperation between Pakistan and China, and to Afro Asian solidarity. Back home, a week later, Bhutto announced his new labor policy on 10th February. Workers would share 4% of annual profits of most of the larger companies, including all of those just nationalized. Elected shop stewards in all factories would represent workers' interest and point of view in all the negotiations with the management. Special labor courts would be obliged to adjudicate grievances within 20 days, and workers were promised full protection against arbitrary retrenchment or termination of services. Cheap workers' housing and free education to metric high school level for at least one child of every worker were to be provided as soon as possible by the state. Old age pensions and group insurance for injured workers and extension of social security benefits to domestic servants were also promised. It was the most liberal and comprehensive labor policy ever introduced in Pakistan, and though never fully implemented, went a long way towards living up to the PPP manifesto promises in that vital area of social reform. Zulfi's Minister of Labour, Muhammad Hanif, who drafted the policy, had himself been a leading activist and revolutionary. We are not so naive as to think that a mere new set of laws will transform overnight the national economic life of our society. President Bhutto cautioned in announcing the new policy. But I am confident that if all of us try hard and work hard, we will all benefit. This is the only way to serve Pakistan. All our yesterdays have seen failure. Let us strive for a better tomorrow, a morrow at the service of the common man. Here was Bhutto at his best, idealistic, inspiring, yet practical in his sober warning, reaching out to help lift Pakistan's common man from hopelessness to a new life. or at least to its prospect for his children.